So yes, we've been away for a bit longer than we said we would, we know that, and it's because various factors, both technical and postal, have led to our 250th episode not being completed yet, but we do have a plan for that. We are going to put it up as a reward for our Patreon backers. We haven't decided at what tier yet, but we should do soon, and that's at www.patreon.com/The Geek Show if you want to get a chance to listen to what I thought was a very good episode, didn't you, Rob?
It was indeed. I subjected, I think that's the right term, myself to Hard to Be a God.
Yes.
Which was interesting. You know, it's always a challenge to throw yourself into loads. I don't want to describe it as weighty because that's not what that is. Sort of sleazy, kind of. It needs a wash, movies.
Yeah. Yeah, we did that. I did Booksmart. Sarah did Summertime, and I think we also went over some of our most unpopular film opinions. So I'm saying here, maybe it's a good thing that this will only be available to people who've already decided they like us.
Yeah, I mean, I think I spent the entirety of the show burning everything down. So.
Yes.
Why am I even on a movie podcast? I clearly don't like them.
But yes, as I say, listeners, I'm Graham, that's Rob. We are Cinema Eclectica, the Geek Show's dedicated movie podcast. And with, obviously, the film release calendar being in flux at the moment, we're doing a few special episodes this week because it's Easter Monday. We are doing a special about religious movies, the good, the bad, and the frankly baffling. That'll be here soon. And we're also doing a new feature called Streaming Spotlight, where we look at the massively growing number of movies that are being released first online.
Yes, that is a nice new feature because it also gives an outlet for me and my, I guess I call it angst. Because if you listen to the review of last year, the review of 2019 episode,
yeah,
I think it was the worst of section. I basically had a bottom 12 because I'm one of these people who say, "Ooh, a new horror movie on streaming. I've got to check that out." So in that new feature, it gives me an outlet to maybe talk about the good stuff or maybe lose my mind, as well as the stuff which Graham does, because we frequent very different corners of the internet. He's a movie cat. I'm a, ooh, what is this cat?
Yes. Could I persuade you that Trolls World Tour is secretly a horror film?
I'm willing to listen.
No, it's not that, but you'll find out what we are reviewing towards the end of the show. We do have some patina of normality. There are some things that are still going on as planned. Before we went on our little break, Mark started a look back over the history of the James Bond franchise, and this week he's up to Pierce Brosnan.
In this part of our look back at the previous eras of the James Bond series, we've reached the 1990s. The year is 1995. UK Prime Minister John Major survives a leadership challenge from the Conservative Party. The Battle of Britpop fizzes up with the chart rivalry between Blur and Oasis. And 6 years on from Licence to Kill, Pierce Brosnan is Ian Fleming's James Bond 007.
Thank you, Mr.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
Now, due to a legal dispute over the television rights to previous films in the series, production on the 17th Bond film had stalled a couple of years after Timothy Dalton's previous entry. Once the wheels were back on and Dalton declined a deal to sign up for a new 4-picture contract that would have seen him sticking with the franchise into the 21st century, Eon Productions went back to a man who had almost taken on the leading role once before. Pierce Brosnan had once been fully signed up to star in 1987's The Living Daylights, but the news of his casting led to renewed interest in his CBS spy show Remington Steele, to which he was at that point contracted. Ironically, this led to CBS exercising their option over the star for another season, effectively fouling his availability for Bond and prompting a furious Albert Broccoli to proclaim, quote, "Remington Steele will never be James Bond." I mention this because shows like Remington Steele had come out of the tradition of either lampooning or knocking off Bond, which had become a cinematic institution by this point, so by the time Brosnan actually took on the tuxedo for real, there were no shortage of imitators or parodies on the market, and perhaps that's why his first film, GoldenEye, is instantly a more reflexive and self-critical film than it really needed to be. Released in 1995, GoldenEye is the film that has its cake and eats it too, having every character around Bond vocally acknowledge and criticise the tropes of the James Bond series, while also being a highly entertaining example of all those tropes in action. Take, for example, this exchange of M, now played by Judi Dench.
You don't like me, Bond. You don't like my methods. You think I'm an accountant. A bean counter more interested in my numbers than your instincts.
The thought had occurred to me.
Good. Because I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur. A relic of the Cold War. Whose boyish charms, though wasted on me, obviously appeal to that young woman I sent out to evaluate you.
Or this one with Sean Bean's Alex Trevelyan, the friend turned enemy with whom Brosnan's Bond tragically has better chemistry than he does with any of his female partners.
Oh, please, James, spare me the Freud. I might as well ask you if all the vodka martinis ever silenced the screams of all the men you've killed. Or if you find forgiveness in the arms of all those willing women. For all the dead ones you failed to protect.
In a further metatextual twist, Brosnan is the rare Bond who actually looks like he's enjoying his job. Because he also takes a leaf from 1990s action movies, he also kills a lot more people, so the two of those things coupled brings a slightly more sadistic edge to things. But he does also take matters even more personally than Dalton's Bond did, with 3 of his 4 movies seeing him take on former friends or ex-lovers and their mad partners. There's a consensus now that he's a better Bond than the films that he was in, and it's possible that the series wouldn't have fared as well as it did during this tumultuous time without him at the forefront. Specifically, in between Brosnan's first and second films, the big screen saw the launch of Brian De Palma's Mission Impossible. The film may have taken time to grow into the credible Bond rival franchise and inheritor of the mantle for incredible physical stunt work that it is today, but it also spawned blockbuster revivals of similar Bond knockoffs on TV from the earlier stages of the franchise, such as The Saint and The Avengers, not that one, although these came to varying degrees of success. But 1997, the year that gave us Brosnan's second film, Tomorrow Never Dies, also brought the cult hit comedy Austin Powers International Man of Mystery.
Allow myself to introduce myself.
At first, Bond wasn't the primary target for Mike Myers' anglophilic romp, which took a little more inspiration from English pop culture such as Adam Adamant Lives, Hard Day's Night and Michael Caine movies. But after the first film became a success on home video, it spawned summer blockbuster sequels called The Spy Who Shagged Me and Goldmember, their titles reflecting a swing towards targeting Bond. Fortuitously enough, these arrived in 1999 and 2002 respectively, each just a few short months before the release of Brosnan's next 2 films, The World Is Not Enough and Die Another Day. For the most part, the parodies didn't even affect the box office performance or public perception of Brosnan's entries, but they coincided with the series itself becoming more outmoded, even as it retrofitted the dependable formula for a 90s action cinema audience. While they can absolutely cast Denise Richards as a short swearing nuclear scientist called Christmas Jones, you can't lay the blame for her skimpy characterisation and leaden dialogue at her feet as if she's the one in charge of the creative direction at this point.
So you're a British spy. Do you have a name?
My name's Bond. James Bond.
Besides, Richards is nowhere to be seen in Die Another Day, a 40th anniversary jamboree that still feels like it warrants a full and frank air crash investigation. Starting with the promising Brosnan brand cold open of Bond being captured and tortured by terrorists, the film then turns into a CGI heavy runaround that fully regresses back to the ill-advised spectacle of outings like Moonraker rather than pressing forward into the 21st century. Landed squarely in between the PG certificate antics of the classics and the 15 certificate escalation of License to Kill, the films of Pierce Brosnan's era are most often found trying to please fans of all stripes. They demand that its star essay all at once Connery's sexiness, Lazenby's vulnerability, Moore's aloofness and Dalton's hard edge, all while packing in everything that Austin Powers was sending up except for the secret volcano lair. Brosnan's recent admission that he struggles to enjoy rewatching his Bond films is a sad testament to the creative torsion in play, which feels like the product of a competitive era in the franchise's history. But even exempting Die Another Day's myriad flaws, it wasn't Austin Powers that fettled Die Another Day, but Jason Bourne instead. Arriving with a bang that same summer, Doug Liman's The Bourne Identity retooled the spy action thriller to such a drastic extent that Die Another Day already looked anachronistic on its arrival that November. Again, it didn't hurt the film's box office one bit, but the critical response to the film prompted a changing of the guard, and a heavily Bourne-influenced rethink that we'll cover when we get around to the Daniel Craig era.
Now it's time for our religious movie special, and
Before that,
sorry, yeah.
I hope Mark isn't rewatching all of these movies for the purpose of these little sections, because with some of the Bond actors, it's good. Timothy Dalton, massive soft spot for him. But Pierce Brosnan, which he's just done here, it's not a good era for James Bond.
It's a very steady downhill slide, isn't it? It starts off with GoldenEye and you think, this is good, this guy could do it. And then every single film is half as good as the last one.
Yeah. It's got Jonathan, I never remember his name now.
Jonathan Pryce, yes.
Yeah, it was on the tip of my tongue, who's basically the king of the internet and he wants to destroy the world, which is a fun little era for Bond. I'm sure there's a segue between that and religious films. I can't quite...
Oh, there is, because Jonathan Pryce just played Pope Francis.
There we are. We have the perfect segue.
Yes, it's our religious movie special. And we asked in Question of the Week, what's your favourite movie about religion? We deliberately phrased that so people didn't think we were just asking for religious movies. It doesn't have to be a movie that believes in religion, just a movie that's about religion.
Yeah.
And sure enough, we got some interesting responses on Facebook. Sandra Hill says Life of Brian.
Well, there's a whole relationship with that movie and religion, wasn't there? That famous TV. I guess it called it a debate, but it was clearly two elderly priests who hadn't seen the movie. The people who'd made it. And it was, even, divorced from when it was released, it's riveting watching. It really is.
It is. It's the closest I've ever seen to Michael Palin getting actually angry at something.
Yeah, he's the universe's nicest man. He shouldn't do angry.
Yeah, quite extraordinary. Mary Elizabeth says, does The Witch count? Which, it obviously does. The Witch was endorsed by a major world religion. Granted, it was the Church of Satan, but...
Satanism is a religion.
Yeah.
Not preloading what I'm doing there at all.
Damon Skinner says, I remember loving Pasolini's Gospel According to Matthew. Not sure if Bergman's movies are overly religious enough or not, but Seventh Seal, I think, Bergman counts, right?
Well, he's one of those sort of fear of God sort of directors. And there's a lot of Scorsese in that too, that sort of worldview.
Yes. I think you can't spell Protestant agnosticism without some of the letters that are in God. Oh, it doesn't have a D, actually. You can do that. You can spell it without those letters.
What he said.
Mikey Toes says The Shack from 2017, based on the bestseller I had never heard of. There's always some movies like that, aren't there? Just like every film tie-in book in Waterstones is never based on a minor motion picture.
Yeah, it makes me pine for the days of novelizations.
Oh, yeah.
Like where they add in entire new acts to stories, which is just fascinating. It's a fascinating thing across books to movies.
Obviously, I have absolutely no stake in Star Wars debates at all, but apparently the Rise of Skywalker novelization includes plot.
Careful now. That might be setting a dangerous precedent for Star Wars there.
Yes. We've also got Graham Peacock's suggestion of Dogma.
Not all these movies have to be pro-religion necessarily.
Exactly. Yeah. I remember enjoying Dogma. I'm not sure I'd want to go back and revisit it, but it did make me aware that Alan Rickman was the greatest man in the universe. So,
I'm not a fan of Kevin Smith in the slightest. I mean, there's movies that I've seen in the right precise moment where I've really got on board with him, and I think Dogma was one of them.
Yeah, me
but
too.
Generally speaking, I find his work quite grating.
It wears thin, I think, which is exactly why I haven't revisited Dogma, despite really enjoying it at the time. But, I laughed. What can I say?
You could make a statement for Red State being a religious movie of his.
That's good. Yes, you could, yeah.
And that was the last one of his I saw, which I didn't mind, but I daren't test that again to see whether it was just the right movie at the right time or it's absolute dog swill.
Yes.
You don't know these things without double checking.
Yeah. sometimes it's best to leave something as a happy memory.
Indeed.
Not a happy memory of seeing this, but a very cherished memory, because I think it's bruising but brilliant. Oliver Lewis suggests Calvary by John Michael McDonough.
Yeah, I remember, I don't know if people listening have got a long enough memory, but this featured on my top of whatever year that was released list. And I've watched many, many movies over the years. One of the things that when you're a kid and you watch horror movies, a mark of a great one is you can't sleep after it.
Yeah.
And I had not done that in a long time. And the first movie in way too long that actually made me have a sleepless night was Calvary. It had such a profound effect on me. It was really, really remarkable movie, that one.
Yeah, I think it's extraordinary. I should go back and watch that again. I think I would still.
He followed it up with War on Everybody.
He did, yeah. He's been
detour.
quiet after that too. Bit of a
They
shame.
both have really. I know there was 3 billboards outside Ebbing, Missouri, but that was not not a recent thing.
Martin McDonough has announced something new to follow up 3 billboards, which I'm delighted to say he has bust well out of his casting stereotype and announced that Brendan Gleeson and Colin Farrell will star in it. Where does he get his crazy ideas from?
Yeah. Well, I love them both in his movies.
Yes, absolutely. I tease because I love the idea that they're going to be reunited in a new McDonough movie is great.
Is that all the answers we have?
Oh, we've got a slew of them from producer Rob, which we should go up with because there's some. This is quite a broad spectrum. As he says, most people think as soon as you talk about something like this, it's got to be a movie about Christianity. He goes for Stigmata.
Is that the Arnold Schwarzenegger action movie?
No, that's End of Days. That's the one where Gabriel Byrne plays a version of the devil who literally pees fire.
How could I forget a fact like that?
The Prince of Egypt, The Message, Oh God, noting that the sequels to this were not very good, especially Oh God, You Devil, which was so awful that not even George Burns hamming it up as both God and the devil could save it. Then taking a fairly radical detour where he goes for Robert Bresson's Diary of a Country Priest.
He's an odd duck, is Rob, with the things he's seen.
Yes. He also adds The Prophecy, Holy Man, which he says is a better representation of religion than Eddie's other effort in the field, The Golden Child, and the original version, of course, of The Wicker Man.
There's a segue there for one of mine.
Oh.
When you talk about religious horror movies, there's always this... I mean, when you look at The Exorcist is probably the biggest one. But that's about challenged faith.
Yeah.
That's not really my sort of bag, to be honest. I think a religious horror movie which gets its tone much better is Richard Donner's The Ormond.
Okay.
Because it's a movie entirely about religious faith, about how this man realises he's got the Antichrist as his child.
Yeah.
And it's his belief which makes that scary.
Yeah.
Which... There's so many movies based, demons, yada yada, blah blah blah. But to have somebody who's fighting for their faith, it's much more interesting within horror, I think. And it's got some absolutely iconic moments in it, like genuinely iconic moments, like the cross coming off the top of the church is an all-timer for horror. It's really fascinating when you realise how it was done. It's basically just a very, very clever camera angle.
Right.
And it's like about 6 foot away from him. But the way they line the camera up with him, it just looks so good. But once you know how it's done, I've kind of pulled behind the curtain here and ruined that gag for everybody. But it's just such a well done movie. I think it holds up no matter how many times you watch it. And it's a British horror movie. We don't have many properly religious horror movies. And The Omen is a great one, I think.
That's very true, yeah. For me, I mean, The Exorcist was the one that I was shocked didn't come up. I was definitely expecting The Exorcist, and I was surprised that well, you were the first person to mention it just there. I put as the picture for this question of the week an image of Michael Stuhlbarg in A Serious Man by the Coen brothers, where he plays a Midwestern Jewish professor who is besieged by a series of personal and professional crises and incomprehensible signs and symbols, and goes to a series of extremely unhelpful rabbis, the eldest of which turns out to be quite big on the music of Jefferson Airplane. I think there is something kind of mystical underneath a lot of the Coen brothers' 21st century work, whether it's the sense of almost quantum hopelessness in The Man Who Wasn't There, or the strange religious in-jokes of Hail Caesar, and A Serious Man is the fullest expression of that. I think it's a really terrific movie.
It's the most enigmatic thing they've done in the 21st century as well, because I don't know if people can remember it, but it's like the first 10 minutes, it's like a short film before the film, and it's apparently it was positioned as sort of like the cartoon before the main feature, but it's tonally about as far away from that idea as you can get.
If anything, it's opposite, isn't it? The first sort of scene of it is quite harrowing, and then it becomes about Michael Stuhlbarg trying to get a record club to admit that he didn't order a Santana album from them.
It's interesting that you bring up A Serious Man, though, because when you think of religious movies, like Rob highlighted, you do think of the Christian movie.
Exactly, yes.
Movies about the Jewish faith, there's probably just as many.
Yeah. And I wish I could follow that up with something, but I am going to go back to the Christian well for my other answers. Any listeners who've heard our review of Silence a couple of years back will know that I am a huge fan of Scorsese's Last Temptation of Christ.
Yes, it divided opinion. No, I was thinking of Silence, wasn't I? But no, yes, he's done two.
Silence divided opinion, and Last Temptation divided it to the extent where people threatened to murder him.
Well, you're having
it's pretty divided. Yeah.
Having a curly-haired Harvey Keitel as Judas is a creative acting choice. Casting choice, I should say.
The one that absolutely shouldn't work, but does, is Bowie as Pontius Pilate.
Yeah. He was certainly being challenging, wasn't he?
Yes. I love that, and I absolutely love Carl Theodor Dreyer's The Passion of Joan of Arc, a film so powerful that, no word of a lie, I almost passed out the first time I saw it.
I've not seen that. It's one of the big sort of silent movies I've not seen, but jumping off the back of the Jewish thing and the horror thing, which I have to, I'm sort of duty bound to. But Der Golem is a Jewish horror movie. And
of course.
That's among very selective company. I couldn't tell you another Jewish horror movie that plays it like that. I could name horror movies with Jewish characters, yes, but not totally built around Jewish folklore like that is.
That's very true, yeah, because I suppose the thing is that after the war, a lot of Jewish culture for a long time became about assimilation and blending in and trying to avoid attention. So you can certainly look back at classic Hollywood movies and say there are buried Jewish themes in it, there are people who are Jews involved in it, but there are very few that are as overtly keyed into Jewish folklore as Der Golem. You're quite right.
It's a hard film to get grips with now because of the ridiculous haircut of the thing. But look past that and there's a remarkable movie.
One day that haircut will come back into fashion and the movie will just look perfectly normal.
We can but hope.
So we're going to review some movies about religion which fascinate us now, and I want to start with what I guess you could call the Ron Ormond trilogy. These are three pretty underground movies that were rediscovered by lovers of kitsch and absurdity over the decades after they were created. And I think there's more to them, while I would also have to acknowledge that a lot of what's in them is pretty bad. But it's bad in a way that is not straightforwardly bad. Like, the other thing that I was going to review before I thought of this was probably one of those new evangelical low-budget movies that are doing big business in America. But I didn't think I could review something like Fireproof or See Me Dance without just sneering at religion.
Yeah, it's American cinema, or Americans with religion, that don't have a sense of subtleness or being humble about it.
Yeah.
And that makes some of these movies incredibly hard to swallow.
Yeah. And, you know, I don't want to do that, because even though I'm an atheist myself, I was a really fervent believer as a child. I was a member of the Church of England, and I was quite an outlier in that I actually believed in God. And it still is a culture that I have a certain affection for. So I didn't want fish in a barrel. And I think to explain what the Ron Ormond trilogy is, and to explain what I see in it, I'll probably have to go through them backwards, because I saw them out of order.
Okay.
And looking at them in reverse, there is kind of a certain clarity to it. The last one is a film called The Believer's Heaven, which was made in, I think, 78, 77.
Okay.
And this one seems to get the least attention, I think largely because, as I say, most people who know these movies know them because they have a kind of so bad it's good cult around them. And The Believer's Heaven is a bit confounding because it's almost good. So,
that's a bit of a cruel statement.
People watch it and they think, oh man, there are bits of this that are kind of competent. That's not what I came for. It still has a few of the flaws of the other films, namely that, like the other two films in the series, it is based solely around the preachings of a minister who has the amazing name of Estes Washington Perkle.
You have a thing for names, because I remember on the episode 250, he's fascinated by one name in particular. There's a hook for you to get into.
Yeah, stay tuned for that. But yeah, Estes Washington Perkle is this Mississippi evangelical preacher who has a voice that sounds like a lawnmower running over a tin can. He is a bit of a liability, even as the films are based around him. I mean, this kind of preaching, where it's very based around the energy of an evangelical minister, is often referred to as charismatic religion, but I'm not sure any charismatic preacher has had less charisma than Estes Washington Perkle. But I mean, there's some good stuff in it. It's filmed across several different countries. It films a lot of quite obscure biblical stories that even the faith-based movies of the 50s and 60s, you know, King of Kings, the Ten Commandments, that sort of stuff, even they did not really address. And the whole thing has this kind of devotional air where you can see that all of the actors in it are members of Perkle's congregation. So yes, they are white Americans trying not very convincingly to be like Bronze Age people in the Middle East. But for once, that feels like kind of the point. You are watching people live out stories that they believe in and worship, and there's something, I think, quite sweet about that. You know, in its own way, The Believer's Heaven is as much a piece of devotional art as the work of William Blake or someone like that. It's made absolutely with belief, and I think even when the results are bad, making a film to express an absolute personal conviction is probably better than making a film because Warner Brothers' third quarter profits are going to tank if you don't deliver it on time.
Well, yeah. That's fair.
There is one very off-base scene in The Believer's Heaven, which I think opens up some of the oddities of the other two films, and it's where Perkle says that in heaven, disabled people and the sick will receive new bodies that work perfectly. And to illustrate this, he gets several disabled members of his congregation on stage to sing a hymn that feels like it lasts slightly longer than the total runtime of Hard to Be a God. And Ron Ormond's camera keeps zooming in on their deformities in a way that I thought was astonishingly tacky. And so you watch this and you think, who is Ron Ormond? What kind of guy is this? Well, strap in, because unlike most films about religion, Ron Ormond's films are from the director of Mesa of Lost Women, Teenage Bride, Untamed Mistress, and The Monster and the Stripper.
Oh, he makes the paranoid movies, like the Reefer Madness movies.
Oh, yeah.
Things. He's a special person, a very special person.
You see, shortly after Ormond put the finishing touches to The Monster and the Stripper, his magnum opus, I'm sure, he was involved in a very serious plane crash. And after that plane crash, he became a born-again Christian. So his collaborations with Perkle are a way to try and reroute his work in cinema towards the godly. However, what they end up proving is you can take the man out of the grindhouse, but you can't take the grindhouse out of the man. And the second film in the trilogy, The Burning Hell, is the biggest illustration of that, because Perkle's story for this is pretty naive stuff. It's about a biker whose friend dies in a road accident, and that's the sort of everyday tragedy that a lot of these evangelical films are based around. Something bad but believable that gets people asking the big questions. Unlike most evangelical movies, the road accident involves seeing this guy lying in the grass at the side of the road afterwards with his head ripped off and his arm ripped off and smears of blood all over the countryside. And he goes to Perkle's church and he says, look, I'm concerned that my friend died without his soul being saved. Could he go to hell? Now, a less naive person than Perkle might have been aware in the mid-70s that there are lots of reasons why bikers might go to hell. He might be aware of this little group called the Hells Angels, for example. But for all that Ron Ormond is giving it the full blood and thunder gore behind the camera, Perkle's ideas are really quite tame. He has this biker worried that his friend is going to hell because his friend once expressed the opinion that it doesn't matter what you believe in, you'll get into heaven if you're a good person. And you think, what is this, the biker wing of the Unitarians or something? But apparently, 60s and 70s biker gangs were mad for liberal theology. They talked about very little else. So Perkle tells him that, yes, without absolution, you will go to hell. And Ron Ormond delivers this vision of hell in absolutely extraordinarily nasty form. People's flesh melting, maggots eating living people's faces. Really insane stuff that then keeps having to cut back to Perkle droning away or his parishioners singing another endless bloody hymn. It's a really odd mix, and it's very hard to describe.
I'm speechless, I'll be honest.
Yeah, it's an odd thing, but one thing that does contextualize it is the first film in the trilogy, If Footmen Tire You, What Will Horses Do? Because if The Believer's Heaven shows both Perkle and Ormond being reasonably sensible, and The Burning Hell shows Ormond being crazy and Perkle being dull, here, at least, is a film where they are both completely mad. If Footman Tell You What Will Horses Do is about the third big plank of Christianity, we remember heaven, we remember the Bible talking about heaven, we remember hell, of course, and now it's time for that third great theme of the Bible, the future takeover of America by communist invaders.
Well, that was around the peak of sort of Satanic Panic, wasn't it?
Yes.
Them two things overlap very heavily.
And it's strange because a lot of what Perkel says in Footman is familiar from modern conspiratorial paranoia about cultural Marxism or cultural Bolshevism, which is a theory that any kind of permissive or anti-religious or anti-family theme in popular entertainment is not there by accident. It's part of a deliberate communist plot to weaken capitalist society in order for a takeover. Now, the first strike against this theory is that it has somehow outlived the death of communism. The second big problem with it is that it was derived by actual Hitler.
Yeah. That takes the power out of a certain theory, doesn't it?
It's the point where you have to think, is this information 100% reliable? But Perkel says that no, this is exactly what is going to happen to America if we continue our permissive ways. He says that drive-ins are, and I quote, nothing but a spawning ground for sex. He says that dancing, and again another quote, is just as wrong as it's always been.
So that means it's not wrong at all?
I mean,
it's been consistent and it's never changed, so...
he is technically right when you put it like that. He conjures up this vision of an America ruled by communism, which is it's kind of squirrely. There's a bit where he talks about how many communists died in the USSR and Mao's China, and then he puts up the statistics for the total people who died. Now, that's pretty dishonest, but he could have got away with it if it wasn't for the fact that Ormond has to dramatise this stuff. And the dramatisations are just lousy. I mean, say what you will about the other two films in the trilogy, but they do show that Ormond is a guy who made his living making westerns and suspense movies and horror movies on a budget of 3 cents. He at least knows some tricks to make things look presentable. This, I don't know what happened here. Maybe he was still feeling the after effects of the plane crash, but there's some remarkably bad dramatizations in here. All of the communist soldiers in it act like they're in a Hogan's Heroes episode. They stomp around, smirking, fidgeting with their hands behind their backs, nodding at nothing in particular. It's that kind of performance, because even though these people are meant to be the ruthless shock troops of a totalitarian state, the film still cannot acknowledge that some of them might not be idiots. And that leads me into the other weird thing about this film too, which is, where the hell are these soldiers from? Because it starts off and they're wearing uniforms that are basically Nazi uniforms, but the swastika on the armband has been replaced with a hammer and sickle. So it's well researched, is what I'm saying here. But they're all talking with American accents. So I'm thinking, often the subtext to this kind of invasion paranoia is that the speaker wants to hate on their domestic enemies and wants to use the threat of invasion as a way of bashing the anti-war left or some other fifth column that they particularly hate. So I thought maybe that's what's going on. But then suddenly about halfway through the film, all of the actors playing the communist soldiers suddenly think, oh God, we're meant to be Russian, aren't we? And they start talking like this for no reason whatsoever.
It's my favourite sort of cod accent, that one. It's just the best.
It really is. There are so many fantastic facts in If Footmen Tie You, What Will Horses Do? We are told that if you live in a communist country, the local party soldiers will come round to your house and have sex with your wife.
Well, that's a bit severe.
We are told in one of Perkel's other astonishing phrases, and remember this film was made in 1971, it says, less than 60 years ago, there was not one communist in the world. What, not even Lenin?
I don't think he's done his research there, has he?
He hasn't. His theology is scarcely any less weird. He says, and I know there is this tradition of believing ever since the days of the Israelites that if a nation displeases God, God will send his revenge down on it. But I think that's a question of phrasing. Like there's a way you can say it which makes it sound like something theologically valid. And then there's the way Perkel says it when he says, unless America pleases God, and I quote, he'll go to some other country. Hey, what is he, a tax dodger? Is God basically, is he just Richard Branson? I suppose the beard gave it away.
I'm pretty sure Richard Branson has a God complex, but yeah, that's a different thing.
Yes. There are so many bits in this that sound weirdly dirty as well. That when Perkel is reminiscing about his own childhood before cultural Marxism started promoting the horror of dancing, he says, we played games that were simple, like drop the handkerchief. Oh, blimey.
What?
I have a friend who's been to prison, and I'm pretty sure he's played something similar.
And it's like going to a friend's house and say, I've got a game we can play. It's called 52 Pickup. And then you just throw a pack of cards on the floor. That's not a game. What are you talking about?
It ends, in case you think I'm being a bit excessive with this, it ends with Perkel looking down the barrel of the camera and saying, will you come? Will you come? Will you come?
Sounds like an Aphex Twin video.
Yes, get away from me, you freak. So, in a strange way, these three movies do span the gamut of all of evangelical cinema. You get the insane kitsch, you get the moments of surprising power, the moments of surprising grace, you get the moments where you think, I'm not a political scientist, but at certain points during If Footmen Tie You, What Will Horses Do, I thought this guy might be a bit right-wing. And you also get something which fans of industrial music will recognise immediately when Perkel tells you the only radio station you will be allowed to listen to in a communist state is one where a voice just says, and he delivers it in his own inimitable Eric Cartman rasp, which says, Christianity is stupid, communism is good. And yes, that is the sample from Christianity is Stupid by Negative Land.
Wow. At least it had some sort of cultural relevance. That's the end of the credits.
Yes. So yeah, that's the Ron Ormond trilogy, which is pretty widely available online. It's been widely bootlegged, but it did end up on a streaming service, and you will be utterly unsurprised to hear that streaming service was Nicholas Winding Refn's.
Oh, I'm pretty sure he has no taste.
It's got to be trolling by now, hasn't it?
Yeah, because there's not, in the age of home video labels that are plucking obscure delights to the point where people are fighting over what's left, I'm pretty sure people aren't desperate enough for whatever played in free, drive-through theatres that one summer.
Yes, no one is fighting over the rights to Shanty Tramp.
No, definitely not. The religious thing's got me thinking, really, because there's movies that tackle religion head on.
Yeah.
And just using the word horses, it made me think the movies that use religion as a subtext. And there's a ton that are great. Just going back to the question of the week, I'm thinking here.
Yeah.
They shoot horses, don't they? Has like an amazingly rich subtext of literally everything. So I imagine you can make a case for that being a great religious movie.
I still need to see that one.
It's bleak as hell, but it's amazing.
I'd heard that, yes. Yeah.
You'll never forget it. So, tackling this subject from a totally facetious angle, I decided to do a Satanist movie.
Nice.
Long-term listeners of the show will remember that I said after watching Hail Satan that, I'm basically a Satanist now. I'm being serious with that, obviously, but Satanism was one of these things where there's different ways it's done in cinema. You could pick a number of Sergio Martino movies. He's tackled it. Dario Argento's had a fair go at it.
Yeah.
But I'm going to have a look at probably the most famous of all Satanist movies, and the one who is that which was directed by a director who's had a problematic relationship with everybody, really, and only in recent years for a long time he was just kind of, it's just Roman Polanski. Who cares?
Oh, you've given it away now. We're all excited, waiting for the big reveal.
But now everybody's really had them flames of hate set off again.
It turns out that molesting kids is bad.
Yeah, there's no historical limit on that, is there?
Who could have known? Certainly not the Caesars.
But I'm talking about Rosemary's Baby. First things first, though, as the credits roll, I was shocked to see that this was produced by William Castle.
He turns up in the oddest places, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he apparently bought the rights to the book, hoping to make his leap from B movies. He did Mr. Sardonicus, The Tingler, and other stuff that I can't remember off the top of my head.
Zots,
yes. He was, if you've seen Matinee, the character which John Goodman plays is basically William Castle.
Yeah. So
he wanted to do this as Leaping Away Pictures, but the studio wanted to make him do hire Roman Polanski, this hot new European director. So he did that. William Castle got ill, and he never managed to build off the momentum of this, which is kind of sad, really. Because, he does appear. There's a sequence where Mia Farrow is outside in a phone booth. Remember those? And he sort of skulks around menacingly. So he has a cameo at least.
Nice.
What is this about? It's in New York, 1965, in which a young couple played by John Cassavetes and Mia Farrow. He is an actor, works in theatre, and she is a wife, I guess.
She is a pixie cut pioneer, I think, is her career.
Yes, she is. And they're moving to this house. It's the sort of house where if it was a 1990s sitcom, somebody could be unemployed and live there. Because it's lavish is the word. But they've got a normal enough relationship, except elsewhere in the building is a elderly couple, and they're taking unreasonable interest in the young pair.
Yeah.
How can I talk around this? And basically, the whole plot is about the fact that Mia Farrow's character, the titular Rosemary, is having nightmares, and she's incredibly paranoid that the people around her, a support group, the gynecologist, the elderly couple, her husband, have done something untoward. There's a sequence about half an hour in which, I guess, rape would be the best way to describe it.
Yes, yeah.
Demonic rape. There's been movies that have done that before, and it's been much more gratuitous and nasty. It's a horror movie in the sense of the Vincent Price movies are horror movies. It's fairly accessible to all audiences. It's just a good drama about supernatural topics. So there's ways to broach a satanic rape scene, and there's ways to not broach it. And this is on that scale. He could have done it a lot worse, especially for somebody who has the reputation that Polanski does.
Well, yeah, I remember thinking this when I saw his version of Tess of the D'Urbervilles. I thought every time Roman Polanski films a rape scene, it's quite tasteful. If only he could take that lesson and apply it to real life.
Indeed. And it's fascinating, really. I've not seen this before, or maybe I have. It's one of these things that's just become so consumed into the cultural identity that you don't know what you've seen and you don't know what you haven't. Like, I'm pretty sure I've seen Psycho, but I don't know whether I have. It's just one of those things. But it's not really a horror movie. It was sold as sort of this thing where it's all about the tension. There's not really an awful lot of tension to it. Not that I'm saying that that's a bad aspect of it. It's more of the suspicion. It's a movie built around the suspicion of what Mia Farrow's character is seeing, the things that are happening, the trust that she can't spend, and the people who she has a great affection for in the case of her husband. And she becomes incredibly paranoid. And it's incredibly well played paranoia because it doles out the information in bits and waves, and everything has a degree of time to sort of be aired. There's no plot beat, whether it's the pain that she suffers, whether it's the weird concoctions that she's gave as milkshakes. Nothing is like, it's there and it's gone. Everything has a amount of time to be believable, where as if this was happening to you, you'd think, why is this elderly woman making me this weird white juice? What's in this stuff?
Yeah.
Which is like a natural process. Whereas a lot of horror movies, I fear, are plot beat, plot beat, plot beat, plot beat, and there's no room around them.
Yeah.
And when people try to accommodate that room around them, they make this mistake where you think that, let's set the first hour where we just get to know the characters. Nothing really happens. Just an hour where you get to know the characters. And then it all happens in the second half.
Yeah.
Which I think is what the A24 model has done and misinterpreted about sort of stretching a horror movie out over a longer stretch, really. And also in that sense of, it gives each act, each sense of mythology, each sense of rationale of what's going on here, a chance to breathe and to have the mythology padded out, which allows the idea that this is a Satanist movie to come to the fore.
Yeah.
Because there's many movies that have been done this where it's happening a lot now, actually. There's Satanic Panic was one such movie, even Ready or Not, where there's this idea of high society are all Satanists.
Yes, yeah.
And it does this thing where it's either all gratuitous or it ends in something raping a young virgin, as the stereotype goes. And it's kind of tedious and played out, and it's all Satanists are bad, Satanists are evil. But the really interesting, because it's kind of weird in those cases, though, because Satanic Panic is a 2018 movie, and the idea of positioning Satanists as like the ultimate evil is really, really weird.
Well, yeah, it's like you mentioned the actual Satanic Panic of the 70s and 80s beforehand, and I do think whenever I see a movie like this, I could probably enjoy this as campy genre nonsense if I didn't remember that people believed in this and it wrecked people's lives.
Oh, yeah. Whereas in 2018 movie about Satanism, it's kind of weird and the boat's kind of sailed.
Yeah.
But this was I don't know if it was preempting or not, but it was certainly before that Satanic Panic era. And it gives it an interesting historical view where it's not like Satanic Panic was ridiculous. The things that they're cited as far as Satanists do.
They are pretty wild, aren't they? Beheading a giraffe in a primary school was my favourite.
Wow.
I think someone would notice.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the sort of thing you can just smuggle in. It's like
with it under your jacket.
But this, it presents it as a very real thing. It goes back to the old witchcraft things. There's little bits in it where if you steal a certain item, you can curse that person. That pops up a few times in the movie. And again, it goes back to what we're saying. It's the fact that it takes its time to tell its story.
Yeah.
And it doesn't just decide that characters are important and then drop it all in the second half. It's constantly moving and it's constantly escalating. It makes it a much more interesting proposition. And the central pair are excellent. Mia Farrow is very, very good.
Yeah.
Although my only reservation about her performance is I guess I kind of got to address this head on because it's such an iconic scene. But throughout the entirety, she's got quite a real, lived-in performance where you think that Rosemary's an actual person.
Yeah.
Whereas in the last act, she goes full nuts.
Yeah.
She talks about what have you done to its eyes, and it doesn't really fit with the tone of the rest of the movie, I feel.
Yeah.
And John Cassavetes is very good. I mean, most of the stuff I've seen of him is his late career where he was in weird exploitation movies that his hat wasn't in.
Yeah.
And The Fury, a Brian De Palma movie in which he's, spoiler for The Fury if you haven't seen it, he's killed by a head explosion, which isn't really in the wheelhouse of the guy who's credited as being the father of American independent cinema.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he's excellent as well. This is I'm amazed it's took me this long to see it, but it's one of these occasions, isn't it, where it's the reputation is intimidating.
Yeah, completely.
You feel like you have... It's such a tent pole of any type of cinema, never mind horror, that you feel like you have to like it to be part of the clique, part of the gang.
Mm.
And I did. I really, really enjoyed it.
Good.
It's a very interesting capsule of an era as well.
Bit of religious trivia about Rosemary's Baby. Anton LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan, claimed that he was in the Satan costume during the nightmare scene until the guy who was actually in the Satan costume told him to shut up.
Yes. Yeah, it's a great movie.
Thanks for checking out one of the podcasts in our merry little family. We really do appreciate it. Podcasts aren't all we do. We're also making strides into the world of video. If you like what you've heard and want more, then head on over to YouTube and search for The Geek Show. On our channel we have video game and low-budget tech reviews, video game chatter in Press X, animation discussions in Keyframe, movie visual essays in Shortcuts, needlessly nerdy lists with Listomania, interviews from our travels, and much, much more. The future's bright, and who knows what else it holds. So don't forget to search for The Geek Show, subscribe, and click that notification bell to stay up to date.
So, as we mentioned earlier, we have a Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Geek Show, where you can help us to keep making these shows. You can follow us on social media, just search for The Geek Show on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter at TGS_The Geek Show. And don't forget, we're going on YouTube now as well.
Hi, this is Zeb Brannigan. You're listening to The Geek Show.
So yeah, if you do go onto thegeekshow.co.uk, you can read some of our written reviews, which you won't be hearing about on the show. Ewan has done a double pack of Fellini with The White Sheikh and Knights of Cabiria.
Yes.
Mark has done a review of A Life Amongst Strangers, a biography of the cult TV star Peter Wyngarde.
The thing about Mark, recently with his recent articles, he goes on really interesting deep dives. So even if the thing doesn't sound like it might interest you, the level of depth that he goes into, you will find something of interest. So please do check those out.
Completely agree there. I've had a couple of reviews up for The Navigator, Buster Keaton's most commercially successful film. And also there's a new second run out. It's Denise Coates' Canadian thriller Curling, which is the most Canadian title you can possibly give a thriller.
Well, he converted me in this article because I wasn't really interested in, slow Canadian thriller. I couldn't care less. But Graham makes a great case for it, so do check that out.
I mean, the other thing about Court that I thought you would respond to is the fact that in the interview, after you've watched this very austere, kind of downbeat thriller about isolation and murder, he suddenly appears in the behind-the-scenes footage, and he's the most effusive guy, and he goes on about how much he loves Lucio Fulci and all manner of things that you would not have thought that he would enjoy.
I want to check out that, I think. And also, by the time this episode is up, I will have another one of the Buster Keaton second free film box set up.
Ah,
so there's another one to look forward to. You can't really go wrong with Buster Keaton.
You certainly can't, yes. But for now, we're looking at the world of streaming because an increasing amount of new releases have been released on streaming since COVID-19 closed the cinemas down. I think we were all kind of expecting that streaming would become more important just because that's the way things were trending.
Yeah, it's like this was, I'd say, reasonably the shift to streaming. We were about 3 years away from it, something like that. And streaming and the COVID-19 global crisis has basically kicked that forward a few years.
Like, I was not expecting at all that people who were distributing smaller independent films would just immediately go, right, we're just going straight to streaming with this. I think that's been a real surprise.
Yeah.
And not just independent films, of course, Trolls 2 just has, which is astonishing. But I will not be reviewing Trolls 2.
You bloody better not be.
No, I am going very much in the opposite direction. I am going to Mubi, which, as Rob said earlier, I am a great patron of, and I'm going to the new film by one of my directorial heroes, Andrew Cotting. Have I bullied you into watching any Andrew Cotting yet, Rob?
Not quite yet.
Okay. I could remember that I've harangued Aidan and Tim into it, but I couldn't remember whether you'd taken the plunge yet. I mean, I think the best place to start is always going to be Gallivant, his debut feature, because I think Gallivant is, and insert the capital letters into your head, Gallivant is the great British movie.
Wow.
But if you're looking for, another easy place to jump on board, I think his new film, The Whalebone Box, might not be a bad place. For a start, unlike a lot of Cotting's other work, it has a fairly simple, easy-to-grasp premise, even if that premise is still very silly, as all of his films are. But unlike something like, say, By Ourselves, his excellent exploration of John Clare's escape from an insane asylum, you do not have to have any in-depth literary or cultural knowledge in order to get the basic concept here. The basic concept is that once Cotting's friend, the author Ian Sinclair, was given a box. Have a guess what material that box was made out of, Rob?
Given that Alan Moore is in his movies, I could literally be anything. This guy runs in such weird circles.
Well, that's a fair point. Yes, it could have been made out of a dragon's tooth, but it's not. It's made of whale bones.
That's close enough.
It's close enough, I guess. It's still pretty weird. It was made of whale bones from a 19th century whale beaching in Scotland. And over the years, Sinclair has decided that the box should probably be, buried where the whale was beached, that seemed like a nice thing to do. And so it follows Cotting and Sinclair and Cotting's regular cameraman, the extraordinarily pseudonymed Anonymous Bosch.
Oh, that's a name.
It follows them up to rebury this box, and you don't really need to know more than that, although there are plenty of allusions along the way. There are chapter titles, which, as I say, work perfectly well as titles for the different sections of the film. If, however, you are a reader of the nature writer Philip Poiré, you will recognise them as the same chapter titles from his book Leviathan, about our historical and literary fascination with whales. And sure enough, Poirot turns up to expound on what he discovered writing that book, to talk about the history of whalebone boxes. Apparently there was quite a tradition of crafting them before whaling became a bit less acceptable, and a lot of other jolly interesting stuff like that. And there has been this recent boom in literature of writers like Poirot or Robert Macfarlane or Helen Macdonald, who write about quite deep or sometimes even spiritual aspects of nature in a way that is coherent and accessible and sells well. And it strikes me as quite surprising that that hasn't really made it to cinema, except in the work of Andrew Cotting, who was doing this decades before it became fashionable. There is an audio excerpt of somebody talking about how time reverses almost as you go into a cave. And I'm pretty sure that's Robert Macfarlane on the soundtrack, because, I mean, he's a guy talking apparently seriously about time stopping in caves. Who the hell else is it going to be? Ainsley Harriott?
Yes, please. I love Ainsley Harriott.
It could be. I have to say, I would absolutely watch Andrew Cotting going on a road trip with Ainsley Harriott.
That'd get me into his filmography.
So I think, it's got all of these ideas in it, and they're quite heady, and the structure is very dreamlike. I think it drifts better than any of Cotting's other films. Even with the chapter title, the whole thing feels like one long, murky dream, and his use of obsolete film formats and pinhole cameras and other devices to give a kind of archaic, old-fashioned, murky image is very evocative. The danger with Cotting's films, and it's a danger that I'm fully aware I've fallen into here, is that describing them makes them sound very intellectual and dry. And while there is a great deal of intelligence behind them, I think they are also sensual. They are funny. His 2017 film, Edith Walks, where he first partnered with the artist and singer McGillray, who appears in the Whalebone box as well. I think Edith Walks is a hilarious film. And the other thing about them, which I think really lifts them out of the art house pack, is that they are very, very emotional. Gallivant, for example, is a story about a road trip around Britain looking at the folk culture of the seaside. But it's not just that. It's about a road trip that Cotting undertook with his grandmother, who was pushing 90 at the time, and his daughter, Eden, who has a very rare medical condition called Joubert syndrome, which shortens her life expectancy. And underpinning all of Gallivant, which again is a very funny and lively film with lots of silly speeded up footage and folk songs, underpinning it all is this sense that, as Cotting says, this might be his grandmother and his daughter's last trip. He might never get this chance again. Now, I don't know about his grandmother, but Eden Cotting is still alive, and part of the structure of the Whalebone box is a father's love letter to his daughter. It begins with this huge close-up of Eden's face, which makes it look like a kind of landscape, and she talks throughout, giving her own interpretation of what's happening and her own kind of surreal parallel narrative. At times she contradicts Sinclair and says bizarrely that there never was a Whalebone box, that she dreamed it and it just appeared in his house. And I don't think you can take that sort of parallel narrative too seriously. It is a flight of fancy, but what makes it work and what makes it real is the fact that it is filmed by a father showing so much love for his daughter, who, against all odds, is still with him and in her 20s and has her own artistic career and is thriving. And I think this is what makes me fall in love with Andrew Cotting, that, there are a lot of directors who make personal essay films, there are probably going to be a lot of directors in the future who make personal essay films about folk culture and wildlife because, as I've said before, that is the way that British culture is just trending. But I would be surprised if any of them can do it with as much absolute heart, sincerity, beauty, emotion, and wit as Andrew Cotting always manages. And that's the Whalebone box. That's on Mubi now, and it will be for another sort of 3 weeks or so. After that, I don't know. I think Mubi have some sort of deal with Amazon, so it may go there, but try and catch it if you can.
Yeah, a few Mubi releases have been released through Amazon's own distribution label. Because Suspiria was I know it's a much more big, high-profile movie.
Ah, yes,
but
was.
That was a Mubi movie, which is also released on DVD through an Amazon line.
You're quite right, yes. And on the other end of the scale, they did it with that Thai movie, By the Time It Gets Dark, which is a really abstruse piece of work. So clearly they're not going to turn their nose up if Mubi come to them with something totally incomprehensible, which I think is good news for Cotting.
Yes, and home distribution, I think will always be valuable.
Yes, absolutely. And we're looking forward to covering a lot more of these new releases on streaming on the show.
Yes. So next week it's a Director's Lottery week, is it not?
It's a good time to be doing some Director's Lottery. So I've got the random number generator open. You've got the list of directors. And let's see where it lands. Oh, that's lucky. It lands at number 13.
Oh, number 13. Well, that's Buster Keaton.
Oh, wow. What a stroke of luck.
Yeah, it was almost like we haven't got a box set out to cover.
Yeah, well, I think we will leave a final choice on what to cover to the people who are on next week once we finalise all of that. But there's an embarrassment of riches, isn't there? I've reviewed, as I say, The Navigator and Sherlock Junior for the site. I know you've reviewed all of the short films, didn't you?
Yeah, there's some absolute. It's a treasure trove, that box set of short films. It really is. There was one particular shot which I think it went as a GIF where he runs through a house full of trapdoors and trap walls.
Oh yeah,
and it just went in a perpetual loop. That was from The High Sign, and if you was going to say watch 2 short films, I'd say that and The Haunted House.
Okay,
both sublimes, I think.
And I mean, you've got that, you've got 7 Chances, The General, Steamboat Bill Jr. It's an embarrassment of riches. Like I say, it will be a lot of fun picking out a Buster Keaton film to watch, and that's what we'll have when we come back next week. But until then, and it will be next week this time, we're certain of that. But until then, I've been Graham.
And I've been Rob.
See you next week.